This is Wavecast Radio. We are continuing our emergency coverage of what scientists are calling the pyroclastic precipitation event, an unprecedented atmospheric phenomenon affecting regions across the globe. For those just joining us, approximately 48 hours ago, precipitation in multiple locations began falling, not as water, but as a chemically reactive substance that ignites upon contact with organic matter. I'm your host, and I'll be with you throughout this broadcast, providing verified information as it becomes available from meteorological agencies, emergency services, and our network of correspondents worldwide. Let me provide a comprehensive update on the current situation. The first reports came from Jakarta, Indonesia, at approximately 1400 hours local time 2 days ago. Residents reported that rainfall, which had been forecast as part of a typical monsoon pattern, began causing severe burns upon contact with skin. Within minutes, emergency services were overwhelmed with calls reporting injuries. Initial responders assumed a localized chemical spill or industrial accident, but the geographic spread of incidents quickly ruled out that hypothesis. The rainfall was chemically active across a zone spanning approximately 80 square kilometers of the Jakarta metropolitan area. Within 3 hours of the Jakarta incident, similar reports emerged from Mumbai, India. Rainfall there demonstrated identical properties, causing chemical burns on contact and igniting vegetation and wooden structures. The Mumbai event affected approximately 120 square kilometers. By midnight, reports had come in from Lagos, Nigeria, Caracas, Venezuela, and Bangkok, Thailand. All locations reported the same phenomenon: precipitation that appeared visually similar to normal rain, but possessed drastically different chemical properties. Early chemical analysis from samples collected in Jakarta identified the substance as containing high concentrations of phosphorus compounds, sulfuric acid derivatives, and organic peroxides in a water-based solution. The combination creates a liquid that is both caustic and pyrophoric, igniting organic materials on contact while also causing severe chemical burns. The global pattern of affected areas has expanded dramatically over the past 48 hours. Current reports confirm the phenomenon has occurred in 73 cities across 6 continents. The distribution appears random, with no clear geographic or meteorological pattern connecting the affected locations. Cities experiencing normal precipitation include London, Tokyo, Sydney, and Toronto, while cities experiencing the pyroclastic rain include nearby locations with similar weather systems. This randomness has prevented meteorologists from developing predictive models that might allow advance warning of where the phenomenon will occur next. Current global casualty estimates stand at approximately 160,000 confirmed deaths, with this number rising continuously as new reports arrive and as delayed casualties from severe burns are documented. Indonesia reports 42,000 casualties, the highest national total due to the extended duration of the event in Jakarta and secondary events in Surabaya and Medan. India reports 38,000 casualties across Mumbai, Delhi, and Kolkata. Nigeria reports 17,000 casualties, primarily in Lagos. Brazil reports 23,000 casualties, with São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro both affected. The United States has reported 12,000 casualties across incidents in Miami, Houston, and Phoenix. These numbers represent only confirmed deaths and do not include the estimated 300,000 individuals suffering from severe burns who are currently receiving treatment or who lack access to medical care. The chemical composition of the rain has been analyzed by laboratories in 16 countries, with consistent findings. The liquid contains approximately 60% water by volume, with the remainder consisting of various phosphorus compounds, including white phosphorus suspended in colloidal form, concentrated sulfuric acid at approximately 15% concentration, and organic peroxide compounds that serve as oxidizers. When this mixture contacts organic material, including human tissue, plant matter, or petroleum-based products, the phosphorus ignites at the moisture interface, while the sulfuric acid causes immediate chemical burns. The combination creates injuries that are both thermal and chemical in nature, extremely difficult to treat, and often fatal even with immediate medical intervention. The origin of this substance remains unknown and represents the central scientific mystery of this crisis. The compounds identified in the rain do not occur naturally in atmospheric conditions. The concentration and combination of chemicals would require industrial production at massive scale. Several theories have been proposed, though none adequately explain the observed data. The industrial accident theory suggests contamination of atmospheric moisture from chemical manufacturing facilities, but the geographic distribution of affected areas does not correlate with industrial sites, and no single industrial process produces this specific combination of compounds. The atmospheric chemistry theory suggests unknown reactions occurring in the upper atmosphere producing these compounds, but atmospheric chemists state that the required reactions are thermodynamically impossible under known atmospheric conditions. The most troubling theory, which government sources have not officially endorsed, but which is being discussed in scientific circles, suggests deliberate atmospheric dispersal of weaponized chemicals, though no nation or group has claimed responsibility, and the targeting pattern makes no strategic sense. Infrastructure damage has been catastrophic in affected areas. The pyroclastic rain ignites wooden structures, vegetation, and any organic materials it contacts. In cities with significant wooden construction or heavy vegetation, fires have spread rapidly, overwhelming firefighting capabilities. Jakarta has experienced fires consuming approximately 40% of the metropolitan area. Firefighting efforts are complicated by the fact that water used to fight fires becomes contaminated when mixed with residual chemicals from the rain, creating secondary ignition sources. Mumbai reports that approximately 30% of the city has burned. Lagos reports massive fire damage to informal settlements constructed primarily from wood and other organic materials. The fires produce toxic smoke containing combustion products from the chemical rain, creating respiratory hazards that extend far beyond the areas directly affected by the rain itself. Medical systems in affected areas have collapsed under the overwhelming number of burn casualties. Burn treatment requires specialized facilities, extensive resources, and long-term care, and even well-equipped medical systems can handle only limited numbers of severe burn patients simultaneously. The sudden influx of tens of thousands of burn victims into medical systems has exceeded all surge capacity. Hospitals in Jakarta, Mumbai, and Lagos report that their burn units are operating at 10 to 15 times normal capacity, with patients receiving minimal care due to lack of staff, supplies, and space. Many burn victims are receiving no professional medical care at all and are being treated by family members with inadequate supplies and knowledge. Mortality rates among burn victims are estimated at 40%, and rising as infections set in and as pain management medications are exhausted. The psychological impact on affected populations has been severe. Individuals have watched neighbors, family members, and strangers burn to death in front of them, often while being unable to provide assistance due to the danger of the rain. The randomness of who was caught outside when rain began has created survivor guilt among those who happen to be indoors. Children have been particularly affected, with thousands orphaned when parents were caught outside or died from burns sustained while trying to protect their children. Mental health services, already overwhelmed by the physical casualties, have essentially no capacity to address the psychological trauma being experienced by survivors. We are receiving updated casualty figures from multiple locations. Indonesia now reports 53,000 confirmed deaths, with an additional 30,000 individuals suffering critical burns. India reports 47,000 deaths, with widespread fires continuing in Mumbai and Delhi. Nigeria reports 22,000 deaths. Brazil reports 31,000 deaths, with São Paulo experiencing ongoing fires in favela communities. The United States reports 18,000 deaths following a Biwai second pyroclastic rain event in Houston that occurred 6 hours ago. The global confirmed death toll now stands at 215,000, with projections suggesting this will exceed 300,000 within 24 hours as burn victims succumb to their injuries and as new events occur. The economic impact is becoming evident. Cities experiencing pyroclastic rain events are essentially non-functional for days or weeks afterward. Transportation infrastructure is damaged or destroyed by fires. Power grids fail as fires damage transmission infrastructure. Communication systems go offline. Financial centers in affected cities cease operations. The disruption to global supply chains is already significant, with manufacturing facilities in affected areas shut down and shipping routes disrupted as ports close. Insurance companies are facing claims that will exceed their capacity to pay, with some analysts suggesting that multiple major insurers will face bankruptcy. Stock markets globally have experienced severe declines, with indices down 20 to 30% as investors react to the uncertainty and economic damage. Agricultural impacts are severe in affected rural areas. When pyroclastic rain falls on farmland, it ignites crops in the field, destroys harvests, and contaminates soil with chemical residues that may prevent future planting. India has reported that approximately 1 million hectares of agricultural land have been affected, destroying crops that would have fed tens of millions of people. Indonesia reports similar agricultural losses. The disruption to food production will create food security issues in affected regions within weeks and may contribute to global food price increases as supply is reduced. Rural communities dependent on agriculture face economic devastation beyond the immediate casualties, with livelihoods destroyed and no clear path to recovery. Weather forecasting has become simultaneously more critical and more uncertain. Meteorological agencies are attempting to identify patterns that might predict where pyroclastic rain will occur, but no reliable predictors have been identified. Normal weather forecasting can predict precipitation, but cannot distinguish between normal rain and pyroclastic rain before it falls. This has created a crisis of public confidence in weather forecasts, with people afraid to go outside when any rain is forecast, while also creating economic disruption as activities are canceled based on forecasts that often prove to be normal rain. Some regions have implemented protocols where all outdoor activity ceases when precipitation is forecast, but this is economically unsustainable and creates its own humanitarian challenges. Government responses have varied by country and by whether they have directly experienced events. Countries that have experienced pyroclastic rain have generally declared states of emergency, mobilized military forces for disaster response, and implemented restrictions on outdoor activities during forecasted precipitation. Countries not yet affected are implementing precautionary measures, including stockpiling, burn treatment supplies, developing emergency response protocols, and in some cases, restricting outdoor gatherings during weather conditions that might produce precipitation. International cooperation has been limited, with affected countries focused on their own emergencies and unaffected countries hesitant to commit resources to assistance when they may face their own events. Scientific research into the phenomenon is proceeding urgently at laboratories worldwide. Atmospheric samples are being collected and analyzed to understand the source and distribution mechanism of the chemicals. Weather balloons equipped with collection equipment are being launched to sample the upper atmosphere. Satellite data is being analyzed to identify potential atmospheric signatures that might predict where events will occur. However, progress is slow, and the fundamental question of where these chemicals are originating remains unanswered. Some researchers have suggested that the chemicals may be forming in the upper atmosphere through unknown reactions, while others maintain that this is impossible and that there must be a surface or lower atmospheric source that has not been identified. The military implications are being discussed privately among defense establishments worldwide. If the pyroclastic rain is the result of deliberate action rather than natural or accidental causes, it represents a weapon system of unprecedented destructive capability. The ability to cause mass casualties and infrastructure damage through weather modification or atmospheric chemical dispersal would fundamentally alter strategic calculations. However, the lack of any claims of responsibility and the random pattern of targeting suggest this is not a deliberate attack. Defense establishments are nonetheless preparing for the possibility that hostile actors might attempt to exploit or replicate the phenomenon. We have reports of mass evacuations from cities that have been identified as high risk based on weather patterns, though the criteria for such identification remain unclear. In the Philippines, approximately 2 million people have evacuated Manila based on weather forecasts and government recommendations. In Mexico, 1 million people have left Mexico City. These evacuations are creating humanitarian challenges as evacuees overwhelm infrastructure in receiving areas. And in many cases, evacuees are leaving areas of relative safety for areas that may be equally at risk given the apparent randomness of where events occur. The question of attribution and responsibility has become politically charged. Some governments and commentators have suggested that the phenomenon must be the result of deliberate action by hostile nations or terrorist organizations, though no evidence supports this conclusion, and no one has claimed responsibility. Other voices have suggested industrial accidents or environmental contamination from decades of pollution manifesting in unexpected ways. Conspiracy theories are proliferating faster than factual information, with social media filled with unsupported claims about government weather control experiments, alien intervention, or divine judgment. The lack of scientific consensus on the cause creates space for these theories to spread and be believed by portions of the public seeking explanations for the inexplicable. Religious interpretations have emerged across multiple faith traditions. Some religious leaders characterize the pyroclastic rain as divine punishment and call for repentance and prayer. Others focus on providing comfort to victims and organizing relief efforts through religious charitable organizations. The biblical imagery of fire falling from heaven has obvious resonance and is being invoked frequently in religious contexts. Islamic scholars have drawn parallels to descriptions of divine judgment in the Quran. Hindu leaders in affected areas of India have conducted ceremonies seeking to appease deities who might control weather and natural phenomena. The diversity of religious responses reflects both the global nature of the crisis and the human need to find meaning in catastrophe. Infrastructure collapse in affected cities follows predictable patterns. Power grids fail as fires damage transmission lines and substations. Water treatment and distribution systems fail as pumps lose power and as facilities are damaged. Communications networks degrade as cell towers lose power and fiber optic lines are damaged by fires. Transportation networks cease functioning as roads are blocked by fire damage and abandoned vehicles. The collapse is rapid and comprehensive, reducing modern cities to pre-industrial functionality within hours of a major pyroclastic rain event. Recovery requires not just extinguishing fires, but completely rebuilding infrastructure, a process that will take years even under optimal conditions. The global death toll has reached 280,000 confirmed casualties, with estimates suggesting the true number exceeds 350,000 when accounting for unreported deaths in areas where communications have failed. Indonesia now reports 67,000 deaths. India reports 59,000 deaths. Nigeria reports 28,000 deaths. Brazil reports 42,000 deaths. The United States reports 24,000 deaths. New reports indicate that Mexico has experienced its first major event with approximately 11,000 casualties in Guadalajara. China has confirmed its first event in Guangzhou, with early reports suggesting at least 15,000 casualties, though Chinese authorities have imposed information restrictions, and independent verification is not possible. Medical supply chains are breaking down under demand for burning treatment materials. Supplies of specialized burn dressings, skin grafts, pain medications, antibiotics, and intravenous fluids are being exhausted in affected regions. International medical supply companies report that global stockpiles of some critical items have been depleted, and that manufacturing capacity cannot meet current demand. Hospitals are being forced to ration treatments and prioritize patients with the best chances of survival, making agonizing decisions about who receives care and who does not. Medical personnel are experiencing moral injury from being forced to watch patients die who might have survived with adequate treatment, but for whom supplies are unavailable. We are receiving reports of a breakthrough in predictive modeling. Meteorological teams at the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts report that they have identified a potential atmospheric signature that may precede pyroclastic rain events. Analysis of satellite data from multiple events shows a distinctive pattern in upper atmospheric wind currents and temperature distributions approximately 6 to 12 hours before events occur. The signature is subtle and not present before all events, suggesting it is a necessary but not sufficient condition. If validated, this could provide several hours of advance warning for some events, allowing evacuations and protective measures. However, the researchers emphasize that this is preliminary and that false positives and false negatives are likely. The information is being shared with meteorological agencies globally for validation and potential operational use. Social cohesion in affected areas is showing signs of strain. In the immediate aftermath of events, communities generally come together with neighbors helping neighbors and strangers assisting strangers. However, as days pass and resources become scarce, tensions emerge. Reports from Jakarta and Mumbai indicate that looting has become widespread in damaged areas, with individuals taking food, water, and medical supplies from abandoned homes and businesses. Security forces are overwhelmed and in many cases are prioritizing protection of critical infrastructure over preventing property crimes. Vigilante groups have formed in some neighborhoods to protect against looters, and there are reports of violent confrontations resulting in additional casualties beyond those caused by the rain itself. Children orphaned by the events number in the tens of thousands. Extended family members are caring for many, but child welfare systems in affected countries are overwhelmed and cannot process the volume of cases. Temporary shelters for children have been established, but conditions are poor with inadequate staffing, supplies, and oversight. The long-term psychological impact on children who witnessed parents or siblings burning to death is difficult to quantify, but will certainly be profound and lasting. Educational systems in affected areas have ceased functioning, creating additional challenges for children's development and well-being. Economic modeling suggests that the global economic impact of the crisis could exceed $3 trillion if events continue at current rates for the next 6 months. This estimate includes direct damage to property and infrastructure, lost economic activity in affected cities, disruption to global supply chains, increased insurance costs, and reduced consumer spending due to fear and uncertainty. The actual impact could be higher if major financial centers experience events, or if the crisis leads to sustained changes in behavior, such as permanent reductions in air travel or outdoor activities. Some economists are comparing the potential impact to the Great Depression in scope, though the mechanisms are different. We have confirmation of a second event in the United States. Los Angeles has experienced pyroclastic rain, affecting approximately 200 square kilometers of the metropolitan area. Early casualty estimates suggest at least 20,000 deaths, with numbers expected to rise significantly. Fires are burning across wide areas of the city, with the Los Angeles Fire Department reporting that they are unable to respond to the majority of calls due to the volume and the continued danger from residual chemicals. Interstate 405, Interstate 10, and other major transportation arteries are blocked by abandoned vehicles and fire damage. Power is out across most of the Los Angeles basin. The Port of Los Angeles has suspended operations indefinitely. The economic impact of Los Angeles becoming non-functional is enormous, given its role in the U.S. and global economies. International air travel has been severely disrupted. Airlines are canceling flights to cities that have experienced events or that are under weather conditions that might produce events. Passengers are unwilling to fly to destinations where they might be exposed to pyroclastic rain. Airports in affected cities have ceased operations due to infrastructure damage. The combination has reduced global air traffic by an estimated 40% over the past 48 hours, with further reductions expected. The airline industry, already facing financial challenges, is experiencing a crisis that may force multiple carriers into bankruptcy. Military forces in affected countries are being deployed for disaster response, but their capabilities are limited. Military personnel are trained for combat and security operations, not for medical care and firefighting. Equipment designed for military purposes is often not suitable for disaster response. Logistical systems designed to support military operations struggle to deliver humanitarian supplies to dispersed civilian populations. Nonetheless, military forces represent organized manpower and resources that civilian authorities lack, and they are being employed as effectively as possible given these limitations. In some countries, martial law has been declared in affected areas, granting military forces broad authority to maintain order and direct emergency operations. Research into protective measures is advancing. Scientists have confirmed that the pyroclastic rain can be neutralized with certain chemical agents, including sodium bicarbonate solutions and certain surfactants. If applied quickly to affected individuals or materials, these agents can neutralize the chemicals and prevent ignition or reduce burn severity. However, deploying these countermeasures at scale presents enormous logistical challenges. Producing and distributing sufficient quantities of neutralizing agents to cover entire cities is beyond current capabilities. Nonetheless, this knowledge is being shared with emergency services, and protocols are being developed for applying neutralizing agents in high-priority situations, such as protecting critical infrastructure or treating exposed individuals. The global death toll now stands at 390,000 confirmed casualties. Indonesia reports 78,000 deaths. India reports 71,000 deaths. Nigeria reports 31,000 deaths. Brazil reports 49,000 deaths. The United States reports 53,000 deaths following the Los Angeles event. Mexico reports 16,000 deaths. China reports at least 23,000 deaths with limited information available. New events have been confirmed in Egypt with Cairo affected, early estimates suggesting 12,000 casualties. Australia has experienced its first event with Brisbane affected, approximately 8,000 casualties reported. The geographic spread continues to defy prediction, with no apparent pattern to which cities are affected. Food and water security are becoming critical issues in affected cities. Distribution systems have failed, and populations trapped in damaged areas lack access to clean water and food. Relief efforts are attempting to deliver supplies, but damaged infrastructure makes access difficult. In Jakarta, an estimated 3 million people are without access to clean water. In Mumbai, approximately 2 million people lack reliable food sources. Humanitarian organizations are attempting to organize airdrops and convoy deliveries, but the scale of need exceeds available resources. Malnutrition and waterborne diseases are expected to create a secondary humanitarian crisis in affected areas within days. We are receiving reports that the predictive model developed by European researchers has successfully forecast an event. Meteorological agencies detected the atmospheric signature over Manila approximately 8 hours ago and issued warnings for residents to seek shelter. Pyroclastic rain began falling 3 hours ago across approximately 150 square kilometers of the Manila metropolitan area. While casualties are still being assessed, the advance warning appears to have reduced exposure significantly compared to events where no warning was available. Early estimates suggest approximately 5,000 casualties rather than the 20 to 30,000 that might have been expected without warning. This suggests that the predictive model, while imperfect, can provide valuable advance warning when the atmospheric signature is present. The success of the predictive model is being tempered by the recognition that not all events show the atmospheric signature before occurrence. Approximately 40% of documented events did not display the signature in advance, meaning the model can provide warning for some, but not all events. Additionally, the signature sometimes appears, but is not followed by an event, creating false positives that could lead to warning fatigue if populations repeatedly seek shelter unnecessarily. Despite these limitations, the model represents the first significant progress in providing advance warning and potentially saving lives. Governments are beginning to implement mandatory shelter protocols when warnings are issued. The Philippines government has announced that when the atmospheric signature is detected, all outdoor activities will be prohibited, and populations must shelter indoors until the threat has passed or been declared a false alarm. Similar protocols are being implemented in Indonesia, India, and other affected nations. Enforcement mechanisms include fines and potential imprisonment for violations, though the practicality of enforcement during actual events is questionable. The protocols are controversial as they restrict freedom of movement and economic activity, but are defended as necessary to save lives. The question of long-term habitability of affected areas is being discussed. Cities that have experienced severe damage may not be rebuilt in the same locations if the threat of repeated events exists. Urban planning experts and government officials are considering whether populations should be relocated to areas deemed lower risk, though identifying such areas is difficult, given the apparent randomness of events. The potential displacement of hundreds of millions of people from coastal and equatorial cities, which have been disproportionately affected, would represent one of the largest population movements in human history. The economic and social disruptions would be enormous, but may be necessary if affected regions cannot be made safe. We have confirmation of events in Europe. Paris has experienced pyroclastic rain affecting the northern suburbs, with early casualty estimates of approximately 9,000 deaths. Berlin has been affected with an estimated 6,000 casualties. The occurrence of events in major European cities, which had previously been spared, has created panic across the continent. European Union leaders are convening emergency meetings to coordinate response and potentially implement continent-wide protective protocols. The European Central Bank has announced emergency monetary measures to maintain financial stability as markets react to the news. The global financial system is showing signs of severe stress. Stock markets have fallen 40 to 50% from pre-crisis levels. Credit markets are freezing as lenders become unwilling to extend credit amid uncertainty. Currency markets are volatile, with safe haven currencies like the Swiss franc and Japanese yen appreciating sharply while emerging market currencies collapse. Central banks are implementing emergency measures, including interest rate cuts, liquidity injections, and direct market interventions. But these are having limited effect as the underlying crisis continues. Some economists are warning of a complete financial system collapse if the crisis continues for more than a few additional weeks. Social media is amplifying both helpful information and dangerous misinformation. Platforms are being used to share real-time warnings about events, coordinate relief efforts, and connect separated family members. However, they are also spreading false information about the cause of the phenomenon, promoting ineffective protective measures, and in some cases, inciting panic or violence. Governments in some countries have shut down internet access or blocked social media platforms in attempts to control information flow. But this also cuts off legitimate communication and coordination channels. The balance between preventing harmful misinformation and maintaining communication freedom is proving difficult to achieve. The global death toll has reached 470,000 confirmed casualties, with true estimates exceeding 600,000. The rate of casualties is not decreasing despite the availability of the predictive model, as the model cannot predict all events, and as some populations lack the infrastructure or organization to effectively respond to warnings even when provided. Indonesia reports 89,000 deaths. India reports 83,000 deaths. The United States reports 68,000 deaths. Brazil reports 56,000 deaths. China reports at least 35,000 deaths. Mexico reports 21,000 deaths. Nigeria reports 34,000 deaths. France reports 14,000 deaths. Germany reports 9,000 deaths. Australia reports 11,000 deaths. New events continue to be reported hourly from locations worldwide. Medical ethics committees in multiple countries are developing guidelines for resource allocation during the crisis. With demand for medical resources far exceeding supply, medical systems must make explicit choices about who receives treatment. Age-based criteria, likelihood of survival, and social utility are all being considered as allocation factors. These decisions, which place explicit values on different human lives, are morally agonizing, but practically necessary when resources are insufficient to treat all patients. Medical personnel implementing these guidelines are experiencing significant moral distress, and many are themselves suffering from burnout and trauma from the sustained emergency conditions. We are receiving reports of successful protective measures being implemented in some locations. Singapore has deployed a citywide chemical neutralization system that sprays sodium bicarbonate solution from existing fire suppression infrastructure when pyroclastic rain is detected. When an event occurred 6 hours ago, the system was activated and appears to have significantly reduced casualties and fire damage. Early estimates suggest casualties in the hundreds rather than thousands due to the neutralization system. Other wealthy cities with advanced infrastructure are examining whether similar systems could be rapidly deployed, though the cost and technical complexity are enormous. Rural populations generally have lower casualty rates than urban populations when events occur, primarily due to lower population density and greater prevalence of indoor work during precipitation. Agricultural communities can often shelter during rain events, without the exposure that urban workers and commuters experience. However, rural areas often lack the medical infrastructure to treat burn casualties, meaning survival rates among those who are injured may be lower despite lower exposure rates. The balance of these factors means rural and urban areas experience different but comparably serious impacts from the phenomenon. Environmental damage beyond the immediate human casualties is becoming evident. Forests affected by pyroclastic rain are burning in massive wildfires that are consuming millions of hectares. The Amazon rainforest has experienced multiple events, with fires burning out of control across areas that would normally be too wet to burn. Southeast Asian rainforests are similarly affected. Marine environments are being contaminated as pyroclastic rain falls on oceans, creating toxic zones where aquatic life is dying. Coral reefs exposed to the chemicals are experiencing bleaching and death. The long-term ecological impacts may persist for decades, even after the immediate crisis ends. Wildlife populations are suffering mass casualties. Animals lack the ability to seek shelter in response to warnings and are fully exposed when events occur. Birds in flight when pyroclastic rain begins often die immediately as the chemicals ignite their feathers. Ground animals suffer burns and often die from exposure or secondary infections. Aquatic species in rivers and coastal waters affected by chemical runoff are experiencing die-offs. The disruption to ecosystems will have cascading effects on biodiversity and ecological functioning that will take generations to recover if recovery is possible at all. We have reports of the first confirmed case of adaptation to the threat. A community in rural Indonesia has constructed a system of covered walkways connecting all buildings in the village, allowing movement between structures without outdoor exposure during rain events. The community has stockpiled months of food and water supplies and has developed protocols for rationing and communal living during extended shelter periods. This represents a potential model for how communities might adapt to living under the ongoing threat of pyroclastic rain, though the resources and coordination required make such measures impractical for most populations, particularly in urban areas. The global death toll has reached 530,000 confirmed casualties. The pace of new events appears to be stabilizing rather than accelerating, suggesting we may be approaching a plateau in the frequency of occurrences, though this is far from certain and may represent normal variability rather than a meaningful trend. Indonesia reports 97,000 deaths. India reports 92,000 deaths. The United States reports 79,000 deaths following additional events in Atlanta and Seattle. Brazil reports 63,000 deaths. China reports at least 48,000 deaths. Mexico reports 27,000 deaths. Nigeria reports 38,000 deaths. France reports 19,000 deaths. Germany reports 13,000 deaths. Australia reports 15,000 deaths. Japan has experienced its first event in Osaka, with approximately 17,000 casualties. Psychological impacts are manifesting across global populations, even in areas not directly affected. Anxiety disorders, depression, and post-traumatic stress are being reported at unprecedented rates. Many people report being afraid to go outside, even when no precipitation is forecast. Sleep disturbances are common, as people fear being caught outside if rain begins unexpectedly during the night. Children are particularly affected, with schools reporting behavioral problems and emotional distress, even in areas that have not experienced events. Mental health services lack capacity to address the scale of need, and many individuals are coping with inadequate support or none at all. Insurance industry collapse is underway. Multiple major insurers have declared bankruptcy or insolvency as claims exceed their capacity to pay. Reinsurance markets have frozen with reinsurers unwilling to accept risk given the unpredictability and severity of events. This leaves property owners in affected areas unable to rebuild even if they have the resources to do so, as financing typically requires insurance that is now unavailable or prohibitively expensive. Government-backed insurance programs are being proposed in some countries, but the fiscal implications are staggering and may exceed governmental capacity to fund. We are receiving updated information on the chemical composition of the rain. Further analysis has identified trace elements suggesting the chemicals may be of biological origin rather than purely industrial. Certain organic molecules present in the samples are consistent with metabolic products from extremophile bacteria that can survive in upper atmospheric conditions. This has led some researchers to theorize that the phenomenon may result from bacterial populations in the upper atmosphere that produce and concentrate these chemicals, which then fall with precipitation. If correct, this theory would explain why the phenomenon appeared suddenly and why it occurs unpredictably. However, it raises new questions about what triggered the bacterial population explosion and whether it can be controlled or reversed. Military forces in multiple countries are developing operational doctrines for functioning under the ongoing threat. Protocols include maintaining covered positions and rapid shelter capabilities, developing weather monitoring systems integrated with military communications, and training personnel in chemical neutralization procedures. Some military planners are considering whether underground facilities may be necessary for critical operations to ensure continuity even during events. The adaptation of military forces to the threat is critical for maintaining governmental authority and capability during the crisis. Food production is being severely disrupted. Agricultural areas that experience events lose crops, and in many cases cannot plant for subsequent seasons due to soil contamination. Even areas not directly affected are experiencing disruption, as farm workers refuse to work outdoors during weather conditions that might produce rain. Global food production estimates for this year have been revised downward by 15 to 20%, with further reductions expected if the crisis continues. Food prices have doubled or tripled in many markets, creating access problems for poor populations. Famine conditions are developing in some areas where food distribution networks have broken down and where populations lack resources to purchase increasingly expensive food. We have confirmation of a major event in China. Shanghai has been affected with early estimates suggesting approximately 35,000 casualties. Chinese authorities have imposed strict information controls, and independent verification is impossible. But satellite imagery confirms massive fires across portions of the city. The Shanghai port, one of the world's busiest, has ceased operations, further disrupting global supply chains. Chinese financial markets, which had been partially sheltered from the crisis, have now experienced severe declines as the domestic impact of the crisis becomes undeniable. The global death toll has reached 620,000 confirmed casualties. The estimate of true casualties, including those unreported or not yet confirmed, now exceeds 800,000. The phenomenon has directly affected an estimated 140 cities across all inhabited continents. Hundreds of millions of people have been displaced from their homes, either due to direct damage or due to fear of future events. Global economic activity has declined by an estimated 30% compared to pre-crisis levels. The crisis represents the most severe global emergency in modern history, exceeding the scope and impact of any war, pandemic, or natural disaster previously recorded. Research into potential interventions continues at laboratories worldwide. Scientists are exploring whether the atmospheric bacterial populations, if they are indeed the source, could be controlled through introduction of bacteriophages or competing bacterial species. This approach faces enormous technical and ethical challenges, including the difficulty of deploying any intervention at atmospheric scales and the risk of unintended consequences from introducing organisms into the upper atmosphere. Other research focuses on developing more effective chemical neutralization methods that could be deployed more widely than current approaches. Progress is slow, and no intervention is likely to be available for deployment in less than months, even under optimistic scenarios. International cooperation has increased somewhat, as all nations recognize they face a common threat. A coordinating body has been established under United Nations auspices to share information, coordinate research, and organize humanitarian assistance. However, national interests and resource constraints limit the effectiveness of cooperation. Wealthy nations are prioritizing protecting their own populations, and many are unwilling to share resources or expertise with developing nations facing the most severe impacts. The crisis is revealing and exacerbating existing global inequalities. We are receiving reports of successful evacuations from high-risk areas. The government of Bangladesh has organized the evacuation of approximately 15 million people from coastal areas deemed high risk based on weather patterns and previous event locations. The evacuees are being relocated to areas of higher elevation in the interior of the country. The logistics of moving and supporting this population are staggering, but authorities believe it is necessary to reduce casualties from future events. Similar evacuations are being planned or implemented in the Philippines, Indonesia, and other countries with vulnerable populations in coastal areas. Religious institutions are playing important roles in providing humanitarian assistance and psychological support to affected populations. Mosques, churches, temples, and other religious facilities are being used as shelters and distribution centers for food and medical supplies. Religious leaders are providing counseling and emotional support to traumatized populations. Interfaith cooperation has emerged in many areas, with different religious communities working together to address the common challenges. However, some religious extremists are using the crisis to promote sectarian agendas, blaming particular groups for supposedly causing divine punishment, leading to incidents of violence against religious minorities in some locations. The question of governmental continuity is being addressed in affected countries. In cases where capital cities have been severely damaged, or where governmental leaders have been killed in events, succession protocols are being implemented, and in some cases, governmental functions are being relocated to safer areas. The United States has activated continuity of government protocols, with key officials relocated to secure facilities. European nations are implementing similar measures. In some developing countries, governmental collapse has occurred with no clear authority emerging to replace failed institutions, creating governance vacuums that humanitarian organizations and local communities are attempting to fill. Educational systems globally have been severely disrupted. Schools in affected areas are destroyed or unusable. Schools in unaffected areas are facing attendance problems as parents keep children home out of fear. Universities have largely shifted to remote learning where possible, but many students lack the resources or connectivity to participate effectively. An entire generation of students is experiencing severe disruption to their education, with long-term implications for their knowledge acquisition and career prospects. Some educators are predicting it may take a decade or more to recover educational outcomes to pre-crisis levels. The global death toll has reached 710,000 confirmed casualties, with true estimates approaching 1 million. The rate of new events appears to be gradually decreasing based on the frequency of reports over the past 12 hours. Though whether this represents a meaningful trend or random variation remains unclear. Indonesia reports 103,000 deaths. India reports 98,000 deaths. The United States reports 92,000 deaths. China reports at least 63,000 deaths. Brazil reports 69,000 deaths. Mexico reports 31,000 deaths. Nigeria reports 41,000 deaths. France reports 23,000 deaths. Germany reports 16,000 deaths. Australia reports it toward to 18,000 deaths. Japan reports 24,000 deaths. Numerous other countries report casualties ranging from hundreds to thousands. Infrastructure reconstruction is beginning in some areas that experienced events early in the crisis and have not had repeat events. The process is slow and complicated by ongoing threat. Construction workers are unwilling to work outdoors for extended periods, limiting productivity. Materials are difficult to obtain as supply chains remain disrupted. Financing is problematic with insurance unavailable and credit markets constrained. However, some progress is being made, and the mere fact that reconstruction is beginning provides psychological reassurance that recovery may be possible even if it is slow and difficult. We have reports that the atmospheric signature predictive model is being refined with improved accuracy. Analysis of additional events has allowed researchers to better characterize the atmospheric conditions that precede events, reducing false positives while maintaining the ability to detect true positives. The updated model is being described as having approximately 75% sensitivity, meaning it detects about 3/4 of events before they occur, and 90% specificity, meaning that most warnings are valid. While imperfect, this represents significant progress and provides meaningful protective capability if populations can respond appropriately to warnings. Public health systems are facing challenges beyond the direct casualties from events. Disruption to routine medical care means that individuals with chronic conditions are not receiving necessary treatments. Vaccination programs have been suspended, creating risk of disease outbreaks. Maternal and child health services are unavailable in many areas, increasing mortality from complications of pregnancy and childbirth. Mental health crises are proliferating with limited services available. The secondary public health impacts of the crisis may ultimately cause casualties comparable to the direct effects of the pyroclastic rain itself. We are receiving reports of significant progress in understanding the phenomenon. International research teams report that analysis of upper atmospheric samples has confirmed the presence of bacterial populations producing the chemical compounds found in the pyroclastic rain. The bacteria are a previously unknown species that appears to have evolved or been introduced recently. The population density of these bacteria in the upper atmosphere has increased dramatically over the past 6 months based on archived atmospheric samples. This confirms that the phenomenon is biological in origin rather than industrial or geophysical. The bacteria appear to thrive in specific atmospheric conditions, which explains why events occur in some locations and not others. Understanding the biological mechanism creates the possibility of biological interventions to control or eliminate the bacterial populations. The global death toll has reached 790,000 confirmed casualties, with true estimates exceeding 1 million. The frequency of new events has decreased significantly over the past 24 hours, with only 3 new events reported, compared to 10 to 15 per day during the peak of the crisis. This decrease may represent a natural life cycle pattern of the bacterial populations, or may indicate that atmospheric conditions are shifting in ways less favorable to the bacteria. Researchers are cautiously optimistic that the crisis may be entering a declining phase, though emphasizing that this is far from certain and that vigilance must be maintained. Economic recovery planning is beginning, even as the immediate crisis continues. International financial institutions are developing frameworks for reconstruction assistance. Debt relief is being discussed for heavily affected developing nations. Investment in resilient infrastructure that can withstand future events is being prioritized in recovery plans. However, the scale of resources required for meaningful recovery exceeds available funding, and debates continue about how costs should be distributed among nations and between public and private sectors. The question of attribution and accountability remains unresolved, but has become less urgent as the biological origin of the phenomenon has been confirmed. The bacteria appear to be naturally occurring, though their sudden population explosion remains unexplained. Some researchers suggest that climate change may have created atmospheric conditions favorable to bacterial growth, while others propose that the bacteria were inadvertently introduced through space exploration activities or high-altitude research. Definitive answers may never be available, but the focus has shifted from blame to response and recovery. Transportation systems globally are slowly resuming operations in areas not directly affected by events. Airlines have implemented new protocols requiring covered boarding bridges and rapid embarkation procedures to minimize passenger exposure time outdoors. Some airports have constructed fully enclosed taxi areas and parking structures to protect travelers. Rail systems are installing covered platforms and walkways. Despite these measures, travel volumes remain far below pre-crisis levels, as many people remain afraid to travel even with protective infrastructure in place. The transportation industry faces an existential crisis as reduced demand threatens the viability of many operators, while the capital costs of protective infrastructure are enormous. We are receiving detailed reports on the long-term medical implications for burn survivors. Medical researchers have documented that individuals who survived severe burns from the pyroclastic rain are experiencing complications beyond those typical of thermal burns alone. The chemical components of the rain have created tissue damage at the cellular level that interferes with normal healing processes. Many survivors are experiencing chronic pain that responds poorly to standard pain management approaches. Wound healing is delayed, and many patients develop severe scarring and contractures that limit mobility and function. Plastic and reconstructive surgeons report that standard burn reconstruction techniques are less effective than expected, suggesting that the chemical damage creates physiological barriers to successful reconstruction. The long-term care needs of burn survivors will place sustained strain on medical systems for years or decades. International law scholars are examining whether the phenomenon creates any legal obligations or liabilities. If the bacterial populations were introduced to the atmosphere through human activity, even inadvertently, questions arise about responsibility and compensation. Various legal theories are being explored, including liability for ultra-hazardous activities, environmental contamination, and international tort law. However, the practical obstacles to establishing responsibility and securing compensation are enormous. Identifying which nation or entity might be responsible is likely impossible given current evidence, and even if responsibility could be established, the scale of damages would exceed any entity's ability to pay. The legal discussions are largely theoretical, but reflect human needs to establish accountability and justice, even when practical remedies are unavailable. Cultural responses to the crisis are emerging as artists, writers, and other creators process their experiences and observations. Music, visual art, literature, and film. Exploring themes of fear, loss, resilience, and hope in the context of the crisis are being created and shared. These cultural products serve multiple functions, including processing trauma, preserving memory, and creating meaning from suffering. Some works focus on individual stories of survival and heroism, while others examine broader themes about human nature and civilization. The cultural production emerging from the crisis will shape how future generations understand and remember this period, just as cultural works from previous disasters and wars have shaped historical memory of those events. Educational institutions are developing new curricula to address the crisis and its implications. Science education is incorporating atmospheric chemistry and microbiology related to the phenomenon. Social studies curricula are examining the societal responses and adaptations. Psychology and counseling programs are training students in trauma-informed care to address the mental health needs of affected populations. Engineering programs are developing courses on designing infrastructure resilient to chemical precipitation. Medical schools are training students in specialized burn care protocols developed during the crisis. The educational adaptations ensure that future professionals will be better prepared to prevent or respond to similar events if they occur. We have reports of innovative architectural responses being developed. Architects and engineers are designing buildings with integrated chemical neutralization systems, covered external spaces, and rapid sealing capabilities that can protect occupants when events occur. Some designs incorporate retractable roof systems that can quickly cover entire city blocks when warnings are issued. Others focus on underground or heavily reinforced structures that provide maximum protection. The most ambitious proposals involve redesigning entire cities around the principle of minimizing outdoor exposure while maintaining livable environments. These architectural visions face enormous cost and feasibility challenges, but represent creative thinking about how built environments might adapt to the ongoing threat. The skies that rained fire may yet rain water again. The bacterial populations that turned precipitation into a weapon of mass destruction appear to be declining. The immediate crisis may be passing, though vigilance must remain, as we cannot know with certainty whether events will recur. What we do know is that we have survived the initial onslaught, that we understand more now than we did at the beginning, and that we are better prepared for whatever comes next. This is Wavecast Radio, continuing to broadcast as long as power and equipment permit, providing information and connection for all who listen. The rain that burned has tested humanity's resilience and has found that while we can be injured and killed, we cannot be easily defeated. We adapt, we endure, and we hope for better days ahead. To all survivors listening, maintain your vigilance, support one another, and hold on to hope. The worst appears to be passing, and recovery, though it will be long and difficult, is beginning. This is your host, signing off with cautious optimism that humanity will emerge from this crisis, tested but not broken, wounded but healing, and ultimately resilient in the face of even the most unexpected and terrible threats.